Hey guys, welcome back. I know hunting season isn't over, but in today's video, I really wanted to talk about a few things that can help you with this coming off-season's habitat improvement checklist. Anyone that's been hunting really ever can tell you that it's not nonstop action while you're sitting in the deer woods. In fact, you have a lot of free time, and for me, just like I'm sure many of you do, I'm already brainstorming on ways I can improve my property for next year's season. And we're going to touch on a few things in this video. First, we're going to talk about some on-stand observations that you should be looking for. Next, we'll kind of talk about property-specific needs and how you can figure out what your property needs in terms of whitetail habitat. And finally, I'll give you a real-life example on what we want to do with this property and where our focus is going to be for the majority of this coming off-season. So first, let's talk about on-stand observations. While I'm hunting throughout the season and observing deer movement on my properties, I'm really trying to pay attention to what the deer want to do naturally. That way, during the off-season, when I'm doing all of my habitat improvement work, I am reinforcing what these deer already want to do. I try not to force them to do something that they don't want to do already. Now, there are exceptions to this, just like with everything else. For example, if I have a deer trail that's running parallel to my property border and it starts to veer towards my neighbors, I'm going to do everything that I can to block that trail and steer them towards the interior of my property. Now, again, that doesn't always work. Deer are going to do what they want to do, but I'm definitely going to be trying to steer them towards the interior of my property as opposed to the exterior of my property where most of my access is located. Another thing that you really want to be paying attention to is how are the deer reacting and relating to your habitat improvements that you've previously installed on your property. This could be a bedding area, this could be a food plot, something that you put in that wasn't there before. Anytime that you make changes in the deer woods, you're changing how the deer use your property. For example, if you just have an open woodlot or a closed canopy forest for as far as the eye can see, and then you put in a bedding area, so you either clear cut an acre or you select cut an acre and then you hinge cut the remaining trees. Either way, you have a really thick area that wasn't there before. And the deer that are using your property are going to relate to that area much different than they did when it was just an open woodlot. So as a landowner and a hunter, you really need to pay attention to how the deer are now relating to that bedding area or that food plot. They're going to move through that property a lot differently. And by putting these improvements on your property, you're going to be changing how deer use your property for years. So just because you've had a stand in the same tree for 10 years doesn't mean that it should be in that same tree going forward. So try to be as flexible as possible. Just because you sat in that same tree for 10 years doesn't necessarily mean that you should be sitting there going forward. As you continue to make improvements on your property, the deer are going to start using the property a little bit different as well. And a lot of times, the bigger or more drastic the improvement is, whether it's a brand new destination food plot or you just knock down 2 acres worth of trees, those are pretty big changes in the deer woods, and they're going to be moving through that property much differently than they were before those improvements were put in. So really try to make a mental note on how your deer are moving through your property and relating to those new improvements. That way you can adjust your stands accordingly. Now, speaking of habitat improvements, one of the things I really like to do while I'm hunting is visualize all the future habitat work that needs to be done. And I'll just give you a couple examples here. For example, you might be noticing a few more trees need to come down so your food plot can be getting adequate sunlight. Or maybe later on during the season, once all the leaves fall down and the weeds die back, you notice that your access isn't as secure as it was as the early season. And you might need to incorporate some sort of a screen on your property. Another thing that you might notice while you're hunting is that the deer really want to get in and out of a bedding location from a certain area, but they're always jumping over a downed tree or maybe one of your hinge cuts. And if I were to notice that, I would make a note of it. That way in the off season, I could come back in there, remove that tree, clearing a path so those deer can get in and out of that bedding location how they want to do it naturally. And so those are the kind of observations and the notes that I'm trying to make during the season. Again, I'm really trying to watch how the deer are relating to my habitat improvements and how they want to move through my property, and I'm really not overcomplicating it. I'm trying to reinforce what they already want to do, and if I notice that there's something that they want to do but they can't do it, I try to help them out as long as it fits inside of my overall plan for my property. These on-stand observations that lead to future habitat projects are often on more of a micro scale. But let's talk about your habitat improvement checklist on more of a macro level, the big picture. And what I mean by that is, how does your property fit in to the local area in the local habitat? And what you should really be trying to do is offering your deer something that they cannot get in the local area. Whitetails want a few things to call an area home, and I'm sure you guys have heard this 1,000 times, but I'm going to say it again. They want food, water, cover, and a feeling of security. And I strongly believe that a feeling of security is probably the most important thing, but a lot of times I think that comes down to your access and your hunting pressure, and habitat does play a role in that, don't get me wrong, but in this video I really just want to focus on the other three: food, water, and cover, and how you can figure out what to focus on your property to give the deer something that they don't have in the local area. There are a lot of different types of local habitat that your property can be located in. You've got your wooded settings, meaning there's not a whole lot of agriculture around. And then on the flip side, you have areas that are primarily agriculture with not a whole lot of cover. And then you have areas with a little bit of both. And figuring out what type of area your property is located in is the first step. If you've owned your land for quite some time, you probably know what type of an area your property is located in. But if this is a new piece of property, or maybe you just don't know, a great place to start is Google Earth. Find your property, hit the satellite overlay, and then zoom out. And from the satellite image, a lot of times you can really see what the area is providing the whitetails and what the area is not providing them. And then once you figure out what the area is not providing them, that's a lot of times what you need to put an emphasis on your property. For example, if the surrounding area is nothing but woods or nothing but cover, and there's not a whole lot of food in the area, there's not a lot of agriculture, then you should be putting an emphasis on putting food plots in on your property. If my property was located in an area without a lot of food, then you better believe most of my time would be focusing on food plots. However, on the flip side, if my property was located in an area with a lot of agriculture surrounding it, meaning there's not a whole lot of cover for the whitetails, then that's where my focus would be. I would be trying to put as much cover on my property as possible because they don't have it anywhere else. And that doesn't necessarily mean that if you're in an area that has a lot of cover and you're placing an emphasis on food, that you're not focusing on improving your cover. Or if you have a lot of surrounding agriculture and you're putting most of your work into cover, that you're not putting any time into food plots. That doesn't mean that. It's just you're placing an emphasis on one over the other. And that brings us to this property right here. This property right here is surrounded by agriculture, and there is not a whole lot of cover anywhere nearby. And that really has been the focus the past two off seasons, but we're going to continue that this coming off season. We really need to make this property as thick as possible. And so a lot of the off-season projects that we're going to be working on this coming off-season are going to be geared towards that. We have done that in previous seasons along with food plots and deer trails, but now that we really have the foundation of this property set, now it's time to really focus on giving these deer as much cover as possible. And just like we do with most of our videos, I'm going to be trying to film as much as possible, give you guys a lot of before and after shots, footage throughout the process. Not only so you guys can see, but I also really like to see what something looks like before the habitat improvement goes in and then after it goes in. But I'd say that's definitely the number one thing on my habitat improvement checklist this off season. If you guys have any tips for anyone trying to make an off-season habitat improvement checklist, or you have any questions, please drop those in the comment section below. I'll get back to those as soon as I can, and we will see you guys in the next video.